Reactive training systems.
So, how's things?
Good, man. I was actually a much active little ride this morning from those pulls yesterday, so
Imagine that.
yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
So yeah, I just got back from the Cairo and things are feeling much better now. A little more limber.
Yeah.
That seems to help me manage my symptoms and keep pushing on.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, so obviously deadlift's been on fire for you.
Yeah, it feels really good.
That's nothing new, at least. I mean, it's always impressive and fun to see those videos, but I don't know, the thing that you said the other day, you said that your bench has felt unstoppable lately.
Yeah.
And that stuck out to me. I was like, man, that's a sentence I'm not sure that you've ever said before.
Yeah, I don't think I have.
So what's up with that, man?
I don't know. I think, and like I've talked to one of my coaches, Connor, about it, and he's had a similar sort of situation with his deadlift. And I don't think it's any like one sweet, sexy answer where it's like, oh, if you just do this one thing, like that lift that's been lagging for 4 years is just going to take off. But it's one of those things where you just like, you don't stop doing it. You just keep, and it, like I said the other day, I was talking, I can't remember who, but I said, like, if you beat your head against the wall long enough, the wall will break. And I think might just kind of be how it went, was like just continuing to bench and bench and bench and bench. I do think that the incline seemed to be associated with a little bit of a breakthrough there. My incline was really, really weak, and by the end of that block, it was, I think I hit a 150 single on my bench, which is only 30 kilos off my best raw press. And at the beginning, I think I was struggling to single like 130. So
that's a
putting
big
20
change,
kilos on my incline. I mean, maybe my shoulders were weak a little bit, but yeah, I think
that's a big change. Yeah.
And the other thing was maybe the sort of up tempo strategy that we did, where I was exposed to double the amount of heavy singles. So
yeah.
Maybe even increasing from 4 times a week to 8 times a week was a thing in getting it to move, maybe.
So you felt like this all started then before this block currently that you're in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think training for nationals, I kind of started to pick up some steam on the bench, and it just kind of hasn't let up, which is nice.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting from my perspective. It'll be interesting to kind of do the block reviews on it and see if there's anything that teases out when we start looking at it from more of a data perspective. But but I think that athlete intuition is usually not that far off on a lot of this stuff too. Like what you're saying about incline. I mean, if you put 40 kilos, 20 kilos, sorry, pound conversion still messes with my head, but
yeah.
20 kilos on your incline, and that's, your bench is starting to feel better as a result of that. Like, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty clear thing, right? Like,
yeah,
it's not like this is all happening in some mysterious black box and we don't have access to what's going on without some sophisticated data analysis. I think that the analysis helps to put numbers with it and makes those relationships more clear. But it's been my experience that if you're a lifter and you are paying attention to what's going on, then you notice those things, as long as the signals are of a sufficient magnitude, I guess, and as long as you're in a situation where they can be noticed.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm kind of veering off into the whole emerging strategies thing again, which seems to be like every conversation with me lately. But
well, I think it's, so like you said, putting numbers to it. So you have your athlete intuition, but then being able to associate values to that. I mean, if you have 3 exercises that seem to be linked to success, you can then like associate a magnitude with those and say, okay, which of those three that are good is best?
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, there's obviously a lot of value to that.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not above contradicting myself on the next sentence. Because there are definitely instances where the athlete intuition seems to be wrong as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an experiential thing, like, time under a barbell makes you better at it, or if it's I don't know what it is, but it seems like some people are pretty good at just kind of feeling what's going on, and then the other people not so much.
Might even be a personality type thing.
Yeah, it
an
might be.
interesting association.
Yeah, that'd be man, how to untangle that mess. But yeah, that would be cool. Well, I think it's interesting, like in particular talking about the bench, that you're feeling like it started, in the previous block, and that is kind of continuing, like the momentum is continuing, right? So I'm sure you noticed, I posted a question a couple days ago asking, if anybody had things they wanted us to talk about, and that was like the whole bench thing was something that did come up quite a bit.
Yeah. Thanks,
And
Tony.
and I don't know. I was thinking that, like, at least from where I sit, it's so different, to be me versus being you, because you do get to experience it, and you're seeing it all from a much closer and much more rich level. Whereas the data analysis piece, like, that's about all I've got to go on, other than conversation with you, So, I mean, we're doing this block now that's very heavy on eccentric work, and it seemed to me that that's kind of what was precipitating a lot of this. Now, we're still in the middle of the block, so it's not even possible to do the data analysis on it, even if we wanted to.
Right.
So, that's just my intuition, which is way lower resolution than yours. So it's interesting to me to hear you say that. But with regard to the eccentric stuff, well, I suppose I can give a little bit of background on kind of what brought all this stuff up. So honestly, it was just an idea to try. I mean, I'm sure that frustrates people. It would have frustrated me. Like, you try random ideas sometimes. Like, it would be a lot better if there was an algorithm for everything, right? No, there's not.
Maybe a personality type thing there.
Right. Like, sometimes we try random stuff, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, we felt like we needed more variation from one block to the next, and just changing the exercise wasn't enough. So, like, one thing that we do a lot of times is we'll rotate an exercise, but it still has a consistent strategy. So say that you've got a lifter who is showing the classic chest fall pattern in the squat. You may want to have them do pin squats in one training block, and that will target that deficient pattern. And then in the next block, maybe you have them do safety squat bar, and that targets that deficient pattern in a slightly different way. And usually that's enough, but it seems like if you keep hammering that, it doesn't matter which exercise you go to, you're still hammering the same pattern, and you need to do something more different. So that's kind of a lot of what precipitated the eccentric thing. It's like, okay, let's do something very different that doesn't even target the, weak range of motion type pattern. And eccentric training was something that I had been interested in for a little while. And, it came up in a few interviews I was listening to with some other coaches. And so it's kind of the flavor of the moment almost. is something that I thought we should, hey, let's try it out. Let's dabble with it a little bit. We've got enough time to experiment. It shouldn't be a disaster.
Yeah, no.
It's a controlled risk, right? And so we tried it, and really, in everybody's case that we've tried it so far, it seems like it's working very well. I mean, it seems like it's working especially well for you. At least, again, from my low resolution standpoint, where I'm at right now.
You can safely say it's going pretty well. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's going pretty well, but why? Is it because of the eccentric work? I mean, we're not even done with the block, so let's cautiously draw any conclusions from that. So anyway, so just kind of that as a little bit of background. And I mean, in terms of rationale for what this is going to do, I mean, yeah, we explored a lot of that, and I know you and I talked about it before we set out on this, and I think that helped. I don't know if the rationale is right or wrong, and I don't. From our level, the thing that we're concerned with is the training effect. Does it make you stronger? Yeah. So the rationale is interesting, useful, but it's not essential, Anyway, so that's a bit on kind of where the eccentric stuff came from. I wanted to chat with you a little bit about what it's been like experientially, anything that you've noticed doing it, kind of. Well, I mean, and I'll shut up here for a little bit and kind of let you describe like what it is that we're doing, like, I guess in a bit more detail, and what it's been like. What have you noticed as this block has progressed?
So I guess to start from the beginning, the biggest changes that we've made have been swapping out pretty much all accessory and supplemental movements for exaggerated eccentric tempo work. The accessory movements have been just a tempo squat, tempo bench, tempo deadlift. And then the others are obviously a little bit further removed from the competition movement, but still using that same tempo. In terms of what I've noticed, I feel like I've seen some hypertrophy from it. And I know that literature would suggest that hypertrophy is not necessarily going to be of greater magnitude with an eccentric tempo or increased time under increased time under contraction, provided that volume's somewhat equalized. But I did look a little bit into some of the research in terms of the mechanism of hypertrophy and how that might be different from conventional training or isotonic, I think is the word. Anyways, like a normal tempo training. So it might be, in my opinion, that I'm seeing a little bit of different hypertrophy because it's being brought about by a different training stimulus, whereas 95% of my training has always been this sort of, not exaggerated eccentric tempo. So there might be something to that. And I know that for me, weight gain and hypertrophy have been instrumental for seeing my bench progress, even if slightly for short periods of time in the past. The other thing for me with my hip issue is that the exaggerated eccentric on the squat, I think, has been a really, really big thing in building a more solid bottom position. Having to work so hard to hold position, maintain position. And I mean, it's similar to, I've heard you talk about, and I talk about the benefits of, normal tempo work. So like a 303 squat. And I think this just kind of takes that to the next level, because those last 2 inches, like you're spending a full second in that bottom position before you're coming back up. So as long as you're keeping it difficult where it's difficult, I feel like it does wonders for positioning. And same thing with the bench press, making sure that my touch position has been so much more consistent. And my bottom position in the squat has been very, very consistent. And I think there might be some carryover to the deadlift simply because I've never done an eccentric on my deadlift. You pull it to the top and you just let it fall with your hands on it. So there might be something to that simply because it's totally untrained, akin to how the incline bench seemed to positively impact my bench press by being, pretty weak to start off with, and then, becoming stronger.
Yeah. That's there's a couple things in there. I talked with Eric Helms quite a bit before we embarked on this whole thing, just to try to get a better understanding of what research says is going on here. He's got a far better handle on all that than I do. I had some ideas. It turns out after talking with him, they're not terribly far off, but maybe they were not entirely correct either. So I think it was useful to talk with him. That basically there is something a bit different that's going on with eccentric focused training. Now, the way that we've applied that in this current training block has just been like a slower eccentric. We've been doing 6-second eccentrics. That's the ideal. And also, we should note that the ideal is that it's an even 6 seconds the whole way down. That it doesn't help if you spend 5 seconds on like the top half of your range of motion and then just kind of crash, so that you can still get some bounce out of the bottom or something like that. Like the idea is that you are slow in an even way through the whole range of motion. I mean, some other ways to do that would be like overloaded eccentrics with weight releasers or just negatives, like the old school negative training, right? But yeah, so we've definitely focused on this 6-second eccentric tempo, no pauses generally, and fast contractions on the way up. So yeah, that's. Have you noticed? We talked a little bit about this, about like what the limiting factor was for you on some of the reps. And do you want to speak to how that's changed over the course of the block?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been interesting to transition from in the earlier stages of this block. It was much more difficult for me to maintain an even sort of slow eccentric tempo, and to be able to lower the weight under control. And the two concentrics that I would have would just kind of fly up. But as I've gotten stronger and better at lowering the weight, I feel like I could lower much more than I could press for 2 reps, at least with the effect of the additional acute fatigue from lowering the weight, especially in deadlift. I feel like it really taxes me to set the bar down for 6 seconds. That second rep always feels really sluggish. And same with the bench press, just holding position, my upper back. I find that by the time I go for that second one, I really want it off my chest. So I'll sometimes lose a little bit of positioning in my shoulders. But yeah, gone from the most difficult part being lowering it with a nice even tempo to now the actual concentric or the pressing, standing up with the bar being much more difficult.
Yeah. So another thing that I guess another question that I've got here. Well, one of the possible mechanisms in play is that we talked about some things that are happening peripherally, right? So in the muscles and in the connective tissue and stuff like that. But it could just be a motor learning thing, right? Like it could just be that the slow tempo, and you mentioned this a little bit in the squat, where your squat seems to be really sensitive to position. Slowing down the tempo lets you feel those positions better, and hopefully generates better control. And to your point about bench press and kind of teaching you the position and teaching you the tightness and stuff like that, that's a thing that I've heard from other lifters doing the same thing as well. So that seems to be a fairly common experience. I mean, if I can say that after such limited trials and whatnot at this point, that seems to be common. But my thought is that one reason that this might be working is simply from a motor learning standpoint. So kind of going back to that athlete intuition sort of thing, right? What's your intuition on it at this point? Does this seem like a one-hit wonder type of training block? something that could be producing results this time, but I don't know. It just kind of feels like, once you've extracted the juice from it, it's done? Or does it feel like a thing that might be worth revisiting? Or is there any intuition on it at all at this point?
I think that so sometimes I think that it's often the change in stimulus more so than what you're changing to. I think in this case it's a bit of both. I think that this will probably be useful again, but I think the proximity of doing a block like this would have to be pretty far removed for it to be as effective.
Yeah.
And I'm basing that off of my athletic intuition.
Well, I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think. I mean, what else are we going to base it on at this point? I think we are pretty clear about what the limitations of doing that are. So yeah, but for what it's worth, that's kind of my feeling on it at this point as well. Although I'm gonna dabble in this a little bit myself in my next training block. I've kind of been between blocks for a little while. We've got a newborn here at home, so that's been slowing down the gain train a little bit, but that's all right. But anyway, I'm going to start up a new training block, and I'm going to do some eccentric stuff, even on the front squat. So I really hate myself.
Yeah, seriously. So, I get a lot of those comments actually. Like, Mike must just really hate you, man. You're doing Bulgarian split squats with a 6-second eccentric. That's just not cool.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I like those though. Like it makes me feel alive,
Well, I definitely don't spare myself. Like I have these ideas, and I'll write the training block, and then when I get down there and I'm doing it, I'm like, what was I thinking, man? Why am I doing this to myself? But that's you're right. It makes you feel alive. But
I'm just glad you changed it from the 6 reps on the supplemental movements.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess
pretty
that's
rough
worth
first
mentioning.
day.
Yeah, that's worth mentioning too, right? Like we don't always get it right. The supplemental slots are more muscular focused slots. That would be something where we normally are doing, like you mentioned, Bulgarian split squats or something like that. So we wanted to come at it with a slow eccentric, so 6-second eccentrics. Normally that slot is trained in like the 6 to 12 rep range, Now a 6-second eccentric is slowing down your reps a lot. So I thought, well, let's keep it on the low end. And we did 6 seconds or 6 reps rather. 6-second eccentrics for 6 reps. That first week, and
I think it was only the first day.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Just the first day, because I mean, we started looking at it and we're like, "Dang, that's a really long set."
Yeah,
and energy system wise, that's longer than we want it to be. So let's not do that. So we lowered it down, and we're doing 4 reps. I mean, 4 reps at a 6-second eccentric, time under tension wise, energy system wise, I think we're where we want to be.
Yeah, that's much closer to the mark, I think.
Yeah. When you and I talked before this about some, potential topics and things, you mentioned you wanted to get into some mindset stuff.
Yeah.
So do you have kind of a way to frame this conversation that we can kind of get into that stuff a little bit?
Sure. So I think there was a bit of a shift for me. I can't remember. I think I was talking to you about Christoph at one point. And you said, well, I mean, you can't do anything about his performance. This is the perfect sport for a Stoic, you said. And I was like, oh, what's that all about with my limited, very limited sort of knowledge of philosophy and schools of thought and that kind of thing. So I did some looking into that and found that a lot of the concepts and ideas behind some aspects of Stoicism to be pretty effective in terms of just being able to focus inwardly. I actually went and unfollowed a a lot of people on social media, and it wasn't because they annoyed me or I thought they weren't good lifters or whatever. It was just because I didn't want to be constantly inundated with other people's performances and be more concerned about that than my own training. So that was a big switch for me. And I think that feeds right back into how often you talk about being process oriented, and just kind of trying to string together good training, because in the moment and in actuality, that's all you can do. You can't control the outcome for the other side of the training cycle other than these little pieces and making sure that those are what they should be.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of a cool, I guess breakthrough on the mental side of the sport for me. And I think it's gone a long ways, just even in terms of my bench and not worrying about, I think I hit a PR the other day. I'm not even sure because I haven't thought about or worried about PRs. And I also haven't done triples in a long time, but it's just been such a process centric thing that, I'm doing a little bit more than the last time, a little bit more than the last time, a little bit more than the last time, and just trying to execute and being very much focused in that single session, with most of my athletic endeavor, I guess.
Yeah, like trying to focus on the things that are within your sphere of control.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've talked about this a little bit before, and kind of my experience at the 2014 Classic Worlds. In the lead up to that, my focus was entirely on winning. Like I wanted to win the meet, and that was it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that that's a great goal, to be honest.
I agree.
I mean, because it's not in your control, and I ended up in like this weird spot, right? Like I got a silver medal, and didn't really know how to feel about it, because I had a good day. I performed well, lifted some great weights, had a big third attempt deadlift that didn't go, but honestly, got further than it should have, and, like if you were looking at that competition in isolation, you'd be like, hey, that was a pretty good day,
Exactly. Yeah.
let's go have a pizza, but in that moment, like I remember feeling kind of like mixed, like, but I didn't win,
Yeah.
and that wasn't up to me, you go out there and you lift the most weight that you can lift, and whatever anybody else does is, I mean, that's not up to you,
Exactly.
So, I've got pictures of me standing on the second place podium looking pissed off, and nowadays I because I'm not even actively competing right now,
Right.
and I go, man, second place in the world, that sounds pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a perspective change, and I've talked before about kind of where I'm at in my personal lifting, and I think I'll get back to competing. To what extent, I have like really no idea, truly no idea. It could be great, and maybe I'll get back to a world stage, maybe not. I just don't know, and I'm just content with that right now. But if I do, the focus will be much different than it was before. The focus is definitely going to be on, what do I have control over? What do I, what can I do? What's good for me? Well, and almost leaving, not being ridiculous about it, right? Like I'm not saying that it should be a surprise to you where you place at the end of the meet or anything. Like obviously, like play your strategic games and pick smart attempts and that whole thing. But it's more like, what do you care about? And I think at this point in my life, I will care about my own personal performance a lot more than I will like placements and things like that, which is kind of weird, right? Like, and not everybody thinks this way, which is fine. But I hear people a lot of times, kind of, I guess, just kind of thumping their chest saying like, well, it's a competition. If you're not there to win, then what are you doing here? Like that sort of thing. And all right, okay, to each their own, I guess. But like, look, I've been down that road, and for me personally, it's just kind of, it's a meh,
It's just not nearly as fulfilling.
Well,
I think like if you like you said, if you go there and you are like there to win, and you're Mr. Alpha and all this stuff, and you come in second, like you've failed as far as your mindset goes. Like you lost, and like is that really the experience that you want to have with powerlifting? Like is this something that is win at all costs, and above all else, it's about placing, and or should it be something where it's like, man, if I can go out and have a really great day, like maybe I'll make it on the podium, and if I did, that would be awesome. But if I came in fourth and had an awesome day, and I know the 3 guys ahead of me all just killed it that day, and that's out of my control, then sweet.
right.
It just, I feel like it's so much more sustainable in that second mindset, in terms of even just like what you put your body through. Because if you're there to win, you need to put this weight on the bar, you need to do this, X, Y, and Z in training and hit these weights, because this is what you're going to have to do to win. It just becomes this, it's just so far extracted from, in my opinion, what a sort of an ideal mindset is.
Well, it's, I guess everybody except for one person is going to be a loser with that mentality, right?
Exactly.
Like even if you win your weight class, now you've got the best lifter, so you've got all kinds of different layers where you can look at this. So, forever a loser, I guess. But
like unless you're Ray Williams, you're not a good power lifter, or what? Like, is that? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's just not.
And I hope, I don't know, maybe I should talk to somebody who's really truly adopted that mentality, because I hope I'm not like overly straw manning this whole position. But that's
right. Yeah,
definitely not what I see as being that's not what I would choose for myself. That's not what I would choose for, I obviously don't encourage my athletes to go that way.
right.
And for practical reasons too. Like it's not just it's not just a self-esteem thing. If you wanted to try to distill it down to that, I think I don't think, I know I made worse training choices in the lead up to that 2014 World Championship than I've made maybe in the rest of my career. I'm sure I've done some other dumb stuff and just kind of got lucky, but that was one where I didn't, and so again, the story for everybody who's heard it 10 times already. In the lead up to that, only focused on winning, and also kind of got sucked into this mentality of I've got to do more work than the competition, because you've got this goal that you really don't have control over, so how do you deal with that? Well, my way to deal with it, being, the type of personality that I've got, is I'm going to try as hard as I can, which makes sense. But that turned into doing all the work, doing more work than I'd ever done. And that caught up with me. And I'm convinced at this point that I ended up with a back injury. And I didn't even know that it was a back injury for a couple years after that. But it all started right in that lead up to the 2014 Worlds. And it was a product of really doing too much work, like I've been training since 97, I like it. I think it's safe to say that I like it. Well, in the lead up to that, that's the most demotivated for training I've ever been. Like I remember having to go on YouTube and watch motivational videos just to drag myself down to the gym. I didn't want to train. I had all these symptoms that were, any rational person would look at and say, hey, you ought to pull the throttle back a little bit. I remember going out to a barbecue with a friend of mine, and sitting down at the picnic table, and like I'm just sitting down like this old man, and I sit down and he looks at me and he's like, what's the matter with you? And so I started telling him about my training, and like he's not like a hardcore lifter, but he is active and he knows a thing or two. And he's like, you think maybe you're doing a little too much here? It's like, no, man, I gotta outwork all these guys. And man, that was a bad choice. So,
well, and it spreads your focus so thin, I think, because if you're worried about trying to outwork lifter A and B, then you're going to have to spend time thinking about what lifter A and B are doing, and then you're going to have to find a way in your own training to surpass that.
Yeah, well, it leads you down this road of like volume for its own sake,
Yeah.
I mean, to put it in more practical training terms, I mean, maybe that would be, well, no, it still wouldn't be effective, but like it would be more relevant if the competition was who could do the hardest workout or something like that, but that's not it, right? It doesn't matter, and it's not about who can do the hardest workout. It's who can lift the most weight. And those aren't the same thing. And they get conflated a bit too much. I would say that idea, this, I don't know. It's an idea that comes and goes, right? Like we'll go through, it seems like as a lifting culture, like we'll go through a phase where everybody is convinced like overtraining is a myth. And then overtraining is real and it can happen to you, and it's probably already happened to people you love. And then we go back the other way, right?
It's an after school special drug PSA kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just like this pendulum that goes back and forth, So I don't know, man. I guess nobody's immune, or at least I'm not immune. So anyway, that's my cautionary tale, and a big part of the reason why. I mean, I was familiar with like Stoic concepts and stuff like that before that time. I think that really changed the way that I apply it. I think I apply it in a bit more of a true to life or at least healthy way now than what I was doing then. But yeah, man.
So was that 2014 competition, was that the turning point, or did you continue to kind of have that mentality for a bit before you were able to reflect and be like, maybe this isn't going the way that I want it to?
I would say that was really the turning point. That for sure, actually, because I remember actually after that having a conversation with Susie Gary. Sitting down and kind of telling her like, yeah, I did well, but I've kind of got these weird mixed feelings because I placed second, and she said that like, well, that's not really in your control, and it clicked because that's definitely a thing that gets harped on in Stoicism, so it's like when you start hearing a message from multiple different channels, you start going, hey, maybe I ought to pay attention to that. So that was a pretty big turning point for me, So yeah, that was when it shifted, when my mental approach to competing shifted, I guess. Started to apply the concepts in a little bit different way.
Well, and I think that, and I know you've had hip issues or have hip issues similar to what I've got going on with my squat. And I think that sort of lends itself, that idea or that sort of way of thinking lends itself to a pretty good mindset around injury and recovery and that kind of thing, because you don't have, I mean, for me, thinking about, I got to get my squat back up into the 300s or else I'm not going to be able to compete because I know Bryce has squatted this, and I know Christoph's squatting this, and Garrett's squatting this, and blah, blah, blah. And thinking about it that way led me to kind of push beyond where I should have been with my hip injury more than once. And since kind of changing how I was thinking about things and being like, okay, well, I need to get my squat as strong as it can be. Like, it doesn't matter what those guys are going to squat, because they're going to squat what they're going to squat. I can't do anything about that. So if I can get my squat as strong as it can be, the biggest way to do that is going to be getting healthy, obviously. So I think that that's kind of shifted my attitude towards my I don't know, injury recovery goals. And the biggest thing for me is just trying to get weight on the bar that doesn't make me feel like I'm sliding backwards with the injury.
Right. You know, it's interesting. It kind of, I work with a lot of folks who, you know, end up going to these big competitions, and it's like when the competition starts to get close, you hear people say things like, well, I'm going to stop posting on social media, you know, from now until the competition. It's like the last 6 weeks, I'm going to go social media dark, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, hey, that's fine. Like, if you don't want the distraction, that's fine. Well,
Yeah.
it turns out for a lot of people, the reason is they don't want their competition to know what they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't understand.
Yeah.
You know, because first of all, anybody who's been around this for very long can look at your opener, look at your second attempt, and they're going to get a good idea of, you know, you're going to call for something on your third, and they're going to go, they're bluffing, you know, or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If it's going to come down to that, there's other ways to tell,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So they're definitely not pulling up your Instagram videos to check and see, you know.
No.
Right. So
I mean, you can speculate based on that stuff.
Right.
And I'm probably guilty of it many times, being like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so hit this for a triple, so at the meet, you know, they may or may not be above their nominated squat, and, you know, things like that. But then you get there, and it can be so wildly in one direction or the other. It's like, oh, man, he tripled that, and then he missed it today. Or he tripled that, and then he hit 60 kilos above that. And it looked hard in the video, but I don't know. So it doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter.
Right. You know, but, you know, so like, it's funny how people start playing these mental games in the lead up to the meets, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's
with the nomination jostling too, like, oh, I'm going to put this in my nominations.
Right.
Nobody will see it coming when I open 20 kilos heavy. It's like, people see your name, they're like, I know what you're doing.
Right. And I mean, finding competition results is easy this day and age. So, I mean, unless you're going to sandbag on your competitions for 2 years to pull some stunt with your nominations, like, come on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the other thing, like, in terms of like mental, like psychological tactics to play on your competition, I've seen that happen the other direction more. You know, like, it's not going social media dark that psychs out your competition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's you know, paying too much attention to what the competition is doing, you know. So it's like, you know, say that I'm gonna compete against Dennis, you know, and imagine for a minute, imagine that it's gonna be close. Hey, it's my imagination, so we'll imagine whatever I want. You know, but if I'm like watching his social media and seeing him post like all this big stuff, you know, then like chances of that influencing me and causing me to make a bad choice is higher, you know. Now, on the other hand, I can insulate myself from that if I just say, I'm going to focus on the things that are within my control, you know. Now, if Dennis just kind of stopped posting, well, okay, he helped me out really, because he's taken away my opportunity to psych myself out, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, we're veering off pretty far into the realm of speculation, I guess, which is fine. But, yeah. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of, I think that is a healthy attitude toward competing, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I had my best performance ever, and I maybe I just say that because of the result, but when I was also silver at IPF Classic Worlds, and I think it was 2016, clean. I had no idea what was going on that day. I purposefully didn't watch the screen from the back. I didn't look at the score table. I told my two coaches, the two Canadian coaches, they did a fantastic job that day. I told them, like, look, I trust you guys. I know you guys have seen my training. I know that, like, we have a good dynamic here. So don't tell me, like, I don't need to know what's on the bar. If I find out on the way out, like, it's not going to wreck me or anything, but like, you don't have to run anything by me. Just do what you think I need to do to have the best day I can. And I paid no attention, no idea where I was in the placings, no idea if I was going to medal in any of the individual lifts until it came down to my last deadlift. And Ryan Stinn just kind of said, hey, if you hit this, you get second. If you miss it, you get nothing. And I was like, okay, sweet. Like, I'm going to go make sure this deadlift happens. And that was great for me to be able to just tune out all the noise and be like, I'm here to lift these weights and just execute and perform the best I can. And that's all that I can do. And I think I kind of unknowingly and without, intending to, kind of adopted that same mindset that day. And it was incredibly successful for me to be able to be so solely focused on my own performance.
Yeah.
And I never really put that together with those other sort of aspects of thinking about training then, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because you do see that tactic happening more often in a competitive, in a competitive sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little bit less common, I would say, in in a training sense. And I think part of it too is just we want to be connected to the larger powerlifting community.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us, and I mean, let's be honest, that's online.
Yeah.
It's online for a lot of things, but especially for the powerlifting community, that's where it's at. So,
Yeah.
I think it makes sense to want to maintain that and want to be aware of it. But I think there just needs to be a bit of maturity in the level of importance that you give to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, like, I don't think that going social media dark indefinitely and never paying attention to anybody else's lifts and never interacting with your competitors, like, I don't think that's the way to go. But like you said, you just kind of have to be conscious of how it affects you or how it doesn't affect you, somebody else's, relative success or failure.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really smart way to go about it, and like just that's a Stoic principle too. It's just kind of a little bit of an inward focus as far as being aware of your own reaction to things. Like, hey, every time so and so's video pops up, I start to feel anxious. Well, maybe that's not good for you.
Right.
And you've got to figure out what that means to you and kind of what decisions you're going to make from there and stuff like that. But yeah, man, that's important. I think, it's definitely something that's worth talking about. It's something that, especially for people that are kind of driven by that competition mindset, you're trying to place whatever it is, top 10 at nationals, get a podium spot or anything like that. It's going to be really important to people like that. Like, hey, that's fine. You can, and it's even okay. I think, to have a goal like that, that's fine.
Absolutely.
But keep in mind where it ranks,
Right.
Like if you turn in a performance that's the best that you're capable of on that day, but it's just that, hey, everyone else did too, and I didn't quite make it as far as I wanted. Like, well, okay, that's just how it goes sometimes, and you need to be all right with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like, so with me prepping for Worlds right now, like, it's not like I'm going there saying, oh, wherever I land is wherever I land. It's all sunshine and rainbows. Like, no, I want to go there and win or do my best. And like, I'd like to podium. I'd like to take a shot at the record. I'd like to, but if those things aren't there that day, it's not going to break me. Like, if I go there and I have a good day, I will celebrate it. If I go there and have a bad day and win, I'll still probably I'll have mixed feelings about that. If I went there and had a garbage day, but other people had a worse day, I'd still kind of feel like, it'd be bittersweet. But
Yeah.
the flip side of that, if I have a fantastic day and come in fifth, I'm still going to be really happy about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely sort of prioritizing those goals. The first being to execute on something that you have control over and what you can actually impact and affect.
Yeah. That sounds smart to me, man.
Yeah.
Well, buddy, I think we're kind of butting up against our time limits here, but I think this was a really interesting conversation. Hope everyone else thinks it's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you want to mention or chat about before we wrap things up?
Not really specifically. I don't know. I was having shower thoughts earlier this morning. This is often a good place to think. And I was just kind of thinking about the ways that sometimes people will kind of self-limit, and it kind of ties into that last sort of topic. But a lot of people will read a Greg Nuckols article, and please don't take me as disparaging Greg Nuckols. I think he's one of the greatest sources of information in powerlifting. But somebody will read a Greg Nuckols article and it'll be like, okay, well, this is my genetic potential. Like that's as far as I can go. And if other people are better than that, they're probably cheating, and all these kinds of things that kind of reflect a self-limiting sort of air. And I posted something about this the other day in regards to my bench press, and it really ticks me off. Not so much people making fun of my bench press. I actually kind of like enjoy that. It's like, yeah, bring it on. I will show you one day. But more like if people are like, oh, it's okay that you're not a good bencher. Like your arms are long. And it's like, so are, X, Y, and Z other lifters who are great benchers. But I guess I'm departing here. But just so I think that it's important for people to kind of focus less on, okay, these are the standards, this is what seems achievable, or this is what the data says, and just find that limit. Don't think about what my genetic potential is, but like, how do I get there? The how instead of the what, And again, I think that falls right back into that previous discussion.
Well, and I don't think that. I definitely agree with you. And we're talking about something that there is, by definition, variance to. We all know that some people are better equipped than other people from a genetic standpoint, but you don't know which, and you don't know how far. Like we know kind of what is suggested as far as, limits, but there are plenty of people that it's funny because I think the only people who see it in absolutes are people that don't have a good enough understanding of it, And I don't know, man. I think you're right in terms of mentality. That you don't know where you're going to land. You got to try. That's the only way to figure it out. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't get it, and maybe that's a personality thing too. But I don't get it. Like how you could say, well, I benched whatever, and that's my limit, and just be okay with that if you didn't try to go beyond that at some point. If you tried and you couldn't figure it out, and well, okay, you at least gave it a shot. But without that, it's like, how do you know? Well, you don't know.
Yeah, and I think those kinds of analyses and stuff like that are interesting.
Yeah,
but I think as a new lifter, if you're looking at that and being like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's where I'll top out. I don't think that's the right mindset to have. And not everybody wants to be, a competitive power lifter and really push it in terms of the performance. Some people just want to lift and be part of the community and the culture and have a good time and, try to get strong and win those small victories and stuff. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. But I think if you are someone who wants to be at the top of the sport and you look at a chart that says, oh, you might not be there, and you let that phase you, then you probably won't get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. But.
No, that's worth saying. That is worth saying for sure. That if you don't know where you may end up, a belief that's potentially self-limiting is destructive. And there's, I mean, the only downside of having too much self-efficacy, I guess, is that you may be disappointed, you know.
Right.
But to be honest, you know, this process of reaching the limit of your potential is going to be a long process measured in decades anyway. And chances are you're going to mature through that process. And by the time you get to a point where you go, well, I guess that's enough, you know, you're not going to you're not going to see things the same way that you did 20 or 30 years ago, you know? So, yeah. Anyway, man, thanks again for sitting and chatting with me.
Absolutely.
Let's do the standard. How can people find you and connect with you and make comments about your bench press?
So Tony, you can find me at so I'm Calgary Barbell everywhere. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We put out a lot of content on YouTube. And yeah, it's just Calgary Barbell. You can Google that. Barbell. Find me everywhere.
Fantastic. You guys do a lot of really cool stuff on YouTube. That was actually one of the questions. Like, are you aware that there's somebody like following you around with a camera and like peeking around corners and stuff? So
I am, yeah. Although sometimes for a 6'6" guy, he's really good at hiding behind stuff.
Sneaky. All right, man. Well, thanks again for the chat. It was good talking with you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Okay, sounds good.
Reactive Training Systems.